Okay, so we know how to do the adjusting entry at the end of the year. We talked about that. And then we talked about direct write-offs under the allowance method. So those are your big journal entry structures. But now we want to talk about, well, where do we get those estimates? How did we come up with, you know, this 30,000 credit? How did we get there? So we're going to talk about that. They're showing it as a bucket there, right? So we took our adjusting entry and we filled that allowance for doubtful accounts with all the amount of accounts receivable we don't think we're going to get. And then as we write off accounts, that comes out of the allowance for doubtful accounts. Okay, so it's a nice, just a little different way of looking at it. Okay. And this one's just showing kind of what I was talking about over here. It starts with exactly what we were talking about. So it says, during the second year of operations, Extone Company writes off $26,750 of uncollectible accounts. That included our original $6,000 that we wrote off from John Parker, and then we had others. So we continued throughout the second year, we continued to identify accounts that weren't going to pay, and we debited allowance for doubtful accounts and credited their account receivable. So those journal entries just happen as we go through, okay? So when we're all finished, we wrote off a total of $26,750. Well, that's less than what we estimated, right? So we estimated we would have $30,000 of uncollectible, but we actually only had $26,750. So at the end of the year, December 31st, we now have a new balance in allowance for doubtful accounts. Allowance for doubtful accounts, we took $30,000 minus $26,750. And now it has $3,250 in it. Well, again, allowance for doubtful accounts is a permanent account. So that balance is just going to continue. So we're going to use what's in this allowance for doubtful accounts when we make our estimate for next year. Okay. The big thing to take away and think about here is this original that we wrote off, the $30,000, was based on accounts receivable at the end of last year. Well, at the end of this year, we're going to have a new accounts receivable balance, right? It may include some stuff from last year. Same here. We still have $3,250 in this allowance for doubtful accounts. Well, if we estimated that another $30,000 was uncollectible this next year and we credited, well, we're just keep adding to that account. It's going to keep growing and be out of control, right? Because some of this is still in accounts receivable that we may still write off. Does that make sense? Accounts receivable is carrying over from year to year. So some of accounts receivable may be from last year. Okay. It may have been late in the year, so we haven't written it off yet. So we have to consider what's in allowance for doubtful accounts when we do our estimate at the end of the year. We don't want to overdo it. Okay.
Since they've written off less.
Was that like? Oh, go ahead.
What does that mean?
Okay, so we estimated out of last, at the end of last year, we had $200,000 in accounts receivable. We estimated $30,000 was uncollectible, and that's what we would be writing off the next year. But we wrote off less than $30,000. So we actually only had uncollectible accounts for $26,750. So we actually wrote off less than we estimated. So in other words, we overestimated. That's all that means. Yeah. So then on the flip side of that, they're showing you what happens if we underestimated. So if we actually wrote off more accounts than the $30,000, then we overestimated. So we total accounts written off here was $32,100. So our debits were greater than our credits.
So that's bad, right?
It's not. The thing about like uncollectibles is they're hard to get precise. So it depends on how much you have total. It's like what about, not even 10% more. So we'd kind of look at next year, we might want to up it a little, like readjust our estimates.
Way higher. That means you're like getting you're owed more money than you thought, right?
It means that more people didn't pay than we thought. So, that could mean like we might need to go back and look at our collections and try to collect more, or it may be that we're underestimating this. So yeah, that's the thing with accounting, like we think black and white, right? We think college accounting procedures, everything fit. But really, in financial accounting, you're going to find that it's not all black and white. This is an estimate, so the chances are we are going to either over or under. And one year may be worse than the other. It could be driven by economy, right? You know, if we're having a downturn in economy, think about retail right now. If we're in retail and, you know, our customers or other retail companies, they may be kind of floundering right now. And so, you know, we'll see a downturn maybe temporarily. That might be more of a long-term thing. But you know what I mean? There's a lot of factors there. So it's a great question. But we'd want to keep an eye on this. If every year we were way under or way over, then we're not being accurate. So we would look for trends in that and try to identify and change that. That's a good question. Did that help some?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, that makes sense.
So here, we actually then underestimated. So we wrote off more than we estimated. So we're going to end up with a debit balance and allowance for doubtful accounts of $2,100. That's just going to affect our estimates for this next year. Okay. So we'll still estimate. We just have to take this balance into consideration. Okay. But we're getting close on time, so I don't want to get into too much. Let me see. We talked about that. So we'll just finish these last like 3 slides and then we'll stop. So again, what the takeaway is when we're dealing with allowance for doubtful accounts, every year at the end of the year when we do our adjusting entry, when we debit bad debt expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts, as of that adjusting entry, this allowance for doubtful accounts will have a credit balance. So after the adjusting entry, it will always have a credit balance. Before adjustments, it could have a debit or a credit balance. Yeah, I think that's really it. And we talked about that. Yeah. Any questions so far? I know it's a lot, right? The allowance for doubtful accounts is kind of tricky. So again, Tuesday, we'll kind of recap a little bit about the direct write-off and allowance method, and then we'll pick back up and start doing the estimates on the allowance method, okay? But right now, I mean, you can start working on some of your Chapter 8 homework if you want, especially like the direct write-off method questions and some of these that are just doing reinstatements and the first couple problems. And otherwise, have a great weekend and enjoy it.
So